Say my name as well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
introduce
cool.
yourself, yeah.
Cool.
And this is very fluid, so we can
Okay.
stop and start. And
Great, that's true.
Okay,
Let's have fun.
you're on.
Cool. Hello, I'm Daryl Collins, and I'm here with Heidi Diamond, business faculty at West Valley College, and we're going to give everyone a framework for a cultural framework for global entrepreneurship. And Heidi, I would like to start first. Welcome, and I'd like to you're welcome. I'd like to start with a definition. What is global entrepreneurship?
Thank you, Daryl. I'm delighted to be here and pleased to talk about global entrepreneurship and global citizenship, both very important to today's changing economy. I'd like to start out with an example. Right now, I am wearing earrings from Guatemala, my purse is from Italy, and my jeans are from China. So right now we may already acknowledge that we are part of a global economy because we purchase and exchange so many things from different countries. So to segue into the definition, we can say a global entrepreneur is anyone who does business across international borders. And to be a good global citizen means that you're culturally sensitive, aware, and not judgmental when you do business with people in a different culture.
These are really important, Heidi. Thank you. Okay. So, keeping all these things in mind, Heidi, how can good global citizens be more sensitive to these cultural differences you were just mentioning?
Well, it's very important to do some research, do some homework, think about and learn about the country that you're entering in terms of what their practices and beliefs are. Just to give you a few examples of practices that maybe...
Let's do that again, I'm sorry.
Okay.
You were looking down a little bit too much. I know you were reading your thing.
Yeah.
See if you, when we pause, read.
You got it.
You know what I mean? Don't read as she's talking.
You got it.
Okay.
Was I looking at the right place?
You were kind of
I was like
looking
looking over
here,
there.
yeah.
Why don't you
So
sit
stay
down
looking
she
at the
sees
camera.
you at the level that we want.
That's a good point.
You get a chair.
I don't know how
You're
much to
standing up
move
and
around
tall,
and like
she's
look
gonna
at
start-
Daryl and look at
Exactly.
the camera.
I'm having the
Jeff?
same
Here, do
issue.
you want to use this?
Jeff and Jean, we don't know how much to look at the camera and look at each other.
Well, I think that
It varies.
it's going to, like when he's
You're too low.
talking, you can look at him.
Okay.
And that kind of engages
Okay.
you. And then when he's done, then you might start off still looking at him and then look to the camera to conclude or to round on
Okay.
your statement, okay?
That's helpful.
Okay.
You want to sit here?
Wherever you want.
I want you here.
Okay, good.
Because
I'll
she's
be
going to
right
look at
here.
you. See, this is the level I want
Okay.
you at.
Heidi,
okay?
you're looking at me.
Okay. Here's looking at you.
Here's looking at you, kid.
Okay.
Okay, so that last little segment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll do question 2
Okay.
again.
And then just kind of I don't know if this is anything worth noting, but when you were talking about the definition of global cultural framework for global entrepreneurship, and then you said that my pants, my job. That's kind of like I was thinking. Well, that's like.
Ask question 1 again.
See,
Yeah.
we.
You got it. So let's launch right into this story of global entrepreneurship, Heidi. What is a global entrepreneur?
Thank you, Daryl. I'd like to start with an example. I'd like to make this relevant for you by thinking of how we proceed as consumers wearing items from different countries. Right now, my earrings are from Guatemala, my purse is from Italy, and my jeans are from China. So as consumers, we're enjoying these various products, but we'd also like to think about as future business people and business leaders, we could be entrepreneurs who are engaged in importing and exporting some of these important commodities that people would enjoy using. To take it one step further, a global entrepreneur is someone who engages in these activities across international borders. And in order to be successful in this pursuit, it's really important for us to be sensitive global citizens, aware of different cultural practices, and non-judgmental about the things we encounter when we work with other people.
Ah, very good, Heidi. How can global citizens be more sensitive of the different cultural aspects of doing business around the world?
Well, it's really a good idea for us to do our homework, and our due diligence before we go into other countries. And just to give a few examples of maybe companies that didn't think about this in advance, the Chevy Nova, the Chevrolet company, produced a car years ago called the Chevy Nova, which was quite popular. However, when they imported it, or rather exported it in Latin-speaking countries, the car didn't sell.
Huh.
Do you have any idea why?
Does it have anything to do with the attention they did not pay, Chevy did not pay to the language of Mexico? In Spanish, Nova means doesn't go.
Exactly. Exactly.
So they didn't do their homework. They didn't do their due diligence in this regard. Chevy didn't. And this is a fine example of how, in this way, they weren't being sensitive to cultural differences. It's a huge company and a huge faux pas.
Exactly. So to sort of round out that conversation, if they had paid attention, done their research, understood the language, they would have avoided that particular error in their dealings with another country.
I see. Okay. And so other than language, Heidi, other than language, what could be some other key cultural differences to be cognizant of when you're doing business around the world?
Well, it's really important to be aware of certain gestures and symbols that might be okay in this country, but might be offensive in a different country. I'm actually not even going to do the gesture right now because it might be offensive to some of our viewers. However, in the United States, we like to do a thumbs up, meaning
approval.
Exactly.
Yeah. Approval. It's okay. I liked that movie, for example.
Right. Mm-hmm. However, in some Middle Eastern countries and also in parts of Italy, this particular gesture is actually very offensive and a curse and could mean that someone wouldn't want to work with you or deal with you. So it's really important to have that knowledge before traveling.
It is very important. And can some of these cultural differences and gestures and rituals, can some of them change over time?
Yes, it's very important for us to be aware of the fact that culture is dynamic. So certain things that may have started with a solid, substantial basis can evolve over time. An example that comes to mind is some of the dietary practices that some people are still using in the Middle East. Years ago, it was unsafe and unhygienic to eat pork. So there are some cultures where still pork is not considered a food that can be eaten. And then this tradition has continued even in today's society as a tradition and sort of a practice, although in reality it's quite sanitary to eat this. So if you're traveling in certain Muslim countries, Middle Eastern countries, it might not be appropriate to serve pork.
So despite changes in our technology, some of these cultural rituals and aspects of dealing with certain cultures, they can not only change over time, but they can also endure the test of time, it sounds like. So as a part of doing one's homework, it would be important to pay attention to time and pay attention to the dynamic nature, as you said, of cultural rituals.
So we were chatting a little bit earlier today, and I know you mentioned a ritual that you thought had been dynamic, had changed over time with regard to dress.
Well, one that has changed over time, I feel like in Saudi Arabia, for example, it's a country where women can be seen being totally covered in that very traditional dress, but on the same block, on the same street in Saudi Arabia, because of the way another girl grew up going to, say, an English-speaking school, for example, she can wear a miniskirt. She can wear something that's more popular in the Western setting. And those two cultural rituals can coexist. So right there, I think you see an example of a ritual and a cultural tradition standing the test of time and evolving over time.
Yeah, these are great examples and examples of what you see when you do business in different countries.
Excellent. Okay, so I think another important point to touch on is business ethics. And I want to ask you if you can identify...
Again, I'm sorry. You were looking down as you were sort of saying a lot of that.
Thank you.
I think it's more important that
Are you guys okay doing
when you're doing your introduction that
I think I'm okay.
you do it as a okay. No, it's all right. It seems like I have a little echo for some reason.
Okay.
I don't know if it's your headphones or if it's my head. No, that was fine.
Okay.
Just don't look down at
I
your
won't
head
while I'm talking. Right. Sorry.
Let's wait for her to come back. What's she going to do?
Don't know.
Oh, wait, she didn't say, but it's good for me to have a minute to look at my
Yeah.
Yeah,
notes.
look at your notes for a minute.
Thank you for cueing me in. It's really hard to, since I'm not looking, it's really hard to remember. So now we're heading into the ethics of not stereotyping
But
and
you guys had a good, you know.
I thought you were doing that.
Yep.
Excellent. So, Heidi, other than language, what are some key characteristics in cultures that set them apart from one another?
from time to time there are differences in dietary rules. There are certain things in cultures that have evolved over the years based on hygiene and what is safe to
Can I
eat.
stop you for a minute? I'm
Sure.
sorry. In order for me to mix this in with the other, she looks like, so I can mix it with the other one, so you look
Cool.
Yep.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi.
So, that's excellent. Other than language, Heidi, what are some key cultural differences that set... Sorry. That's good, Heidi. So, other than language, what would be some other key cultural differences that set global communities apart from one another?
Oftentimes, when people travel in different countries, they might notice different dietary rules and restrictions. For example, in some Middle Eastern countries, pork is not eaten. This has a historic context because years ago it was not hygienic or sanitary to eat pork. However, some people have continued this cultural tradition, or you might say ritual observance, in respect to the culture and kind of the norm. So applying this to international business, it would not be appropriate in a different country in the Middle East to possibly order pork or to engage in a business meal where you're consuming pork.
So that is a great example. So that is a great example of how a cultural ritual can stay the same over time despite changes in our technology, changes in our global environment. And I'm sure there are ways in which they can change over time. And so it seems like a good way to view cultural differences is to understand how they can evolve over time and also stay the same, despite, like pork, our ability to make it available and refrigerate it.
It's okay. It's okay.
I think you should just, you know what you wanted to say. Just smooth it out.
Right. It seems like it's important to stay aware, to stay cognizant of the idea that cultural differences and cultural rituals can stay the same over time and that they can also change. And so it's an important thing to keep in mind when you're doing business around the world, to do your homework and to know that these cultural differences can still be taking place despite changes in technology.
That's right. I wholeheartedly agree with your sentiment, and I found that to be a great practice to keep in mind as you're doing international business.
Excellent. And so we've talked about some characteristics of culture. What are some differences in business ethics in different cultures around the world? How is it, to put it another way, how do people view right and wrong differently from culture to culture when doing global business?
Well, when we talk about intercultural ethics, it's really important to give people the opportunity to do the right thing, to be successful in all their business approaches and practices. And our ethical behavior is basically based on our knowledge as we enter the country. I'm sorry, I have to cut. I am not nailing that one at all. I apologize.
I don't think he needs to answer the question. Maybe just start again.
I would like to start again.
Maybe you should answer the question again now.
Ask her the question again?
Ask the question again, and just so it's smooth transition into what
Great.
she was going to say.
Okay.
So being aware of languages and different rituals as they change over time, one thing that sets cultures apart is their different view of right and wrong, Heidi. And when we're doing business internationally, how important is it? And in what way should we keep it in mind, those differences between right and wrong from culture to culture?
Well, what we want to keep in mind as we think about cultural ethics is that we don't want to stereotype. We don't want to assume that because we might have had an experience with someone from one culture that was a certain way, that everyone from that culture is going to be that same way. Stereotyping leads to prejudice, and what we prefer to encourage is an overall view, a sensitivity, and an understanding to the way practices are done. So this is the kind of view that we think leads to being a good global citizen.
So going back to sensitivity being a key component of being a good and sensitive global citizen, and it'll help smooth out your business relations internationally from culture to culture around the world. Very good.
Thank you.
Shifting gears just a little bit and trying to illustrate these differences in culture, shed a little bit more light on them. What are some different proverbs, mores, or maxims that you have come in contact with from culture to culture around the world?
Well, this is a really interesting question, Daryl. I'm really glad you raised it. It has to do with how proverbs can be very indicative of the underlying culture and what's really meaningful to people at the very heart of the way they operate. So an expression that you may have heard, a proverb you may have heard in the United States is that the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
I have heard that one.
And what does that one mean to you?
To me, it just means if I raise my hand, I make a lot of noise, and I advocate for myself, I can get more attention. I can get further in everything I do. And to me, that sounds like a very American way to view business and to view oneself.
That's exactly right. So most of us in the United States have been raised with that point of view that we really need to be very overt, kind of loud, and that we'll get what we're seeking. So that's very telling about our culture and how we operate. So completely in contrast is a proverb from Japan that says that the nail that sticks out gets pounded down.
Oh my.
So just to sort of put the question to you, what does that make you think of?
Heidi, that's a stark contrast to the squeaky wheel proverb, and it tells me that in that Japanese culture, there is a much higher premium put on the collective, on the whole. The whole is more important than the one, than the individual. And yeah, there's no better illustration than you're going to get banged down for raising your hand. So there's a stark contrast there. Absolutely.
So to bring it to a business context, and Daryl, your interpretation was spot on.
Thank you.
Imagine doing business with a U.S. person who's just sort of in your face, really direct in their approach, versus someone from Japan who has a tendency to be more introspective and more laid back. Yeah. You can kind of see the challenge and where sensitivity would be very critical in this interaction.
There's a barrier there, a clear barrier there, and I think one way to tear it down would be to eliminate your prejudices and your preconceived notions about individualism versus the collective. As long as you're taking the long view on a situation, I think it'll allow you to be more open, because this is key. I feel like if you go into a situation and try to force it and try to say what you see is what you get, and we're done now, we've shaken hands, and the interaction is over, you're not taking that long view, I think. So yeah, it's important to be patient and to not have prejudices.
Excellent. I wholeheartedly agree with your sentiment.
Thanks, Heidi. Shifting gears only slightly, how do you think, Heidi, context and background factors into international business relations? I think prejudices and background kind of go together. So, another way to say it would be, what historical context are Americans versus other cultures bringing to the table when they're doing business internationally?
This is a great question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Daryl. So context is the overall sort of umbrella background that we set this whole framework in. So in general, in the United States, we tend to be a low context culture, meaning that we take things the way they are. We are direct, we are literal, we are on time, we are on target, we are on task. And our culture tends to be very similar in this regard to Germany and many of the Scandinavian countries. On the other end of the spectrum, in the context view, are countries in Latin America, South America, and also the Middle East and Asia. They tend to be more ambiguous in their communication, a bit more vague, a bit more subtle. So this overall difference in the way we view interactions in the workplace and in business communications affects the outcome. So it's really important that we are sensitive to this distinction.
Sensitivity not only affects your right now as you do business, it also affects the history and the background of the place and the culture with which you're planning to do successful business relations. So yeah, context and background is important, and there's a different premium placed on that from culture to culture around the world, it sounds like. Is that right?
Yes, that's very true. And sort of segueing into the next concept, in the United States, we place a high value on the individual. The individual in the workplace. Wheel. Exactly. And in other cultures, perhaps Mexico, perhaps Japan, the collective is more important. So by way of example, once again, if someone from the United States were to set up a factory or were to enter a factory in Mexico and try to change business practices, it might be hard in that culture to relate to the individualistic nature of a career ladder, whereas they would tend to want to protect the family structure. So once again, we need to be very culturally aware of that distinction.
Other cultures, Heidi, it sounds like, can have it takes a village approach to doing business. That's an old African proverb that relates to child rearing, but it seems like that approach can be taken to business in these certain cultures that have a high context value and a high value on the collective, on the whole, and on their history. You know, we have sayings with regard to work and business, like pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, a famous Franklin Delano Roosevelt saying, and that again illustrates, I think, very well our need to take responsibility for ourselves individually, and that will make the whole stronger. Whereas, you know, if we're being sensitive, good global citizens, we're going to be aware of the fact that that's not the case around the world.
Yes, very, very good additional proverbs to sort of supplement the dialogue about the difference. And again, many of us have grown up hearing these, and it has an influence on how we do business. Another difference in the way we do business has to do with how formal or informal we are. So how would you characterize the United States versus some of the other cultures?
Man, Heidi, I think that if you go into a boardroom here in California or Silicon Valley, red sneakers in the boardroom can abound. I think you're going to see people that are being individuals, that are exploring their individual style more, whereas there can be a rigidity in other cultures to not do that, to conform to. Basically, I think you need to be aware of your social norms. Is that right? And how they change.
That's exactly right. In the United States, we tend to be more informal. You could easily call the president or CEO of your company by his or her first name.
I do.
Would be, yeah, me too. That'd be exactly right. Whereas in Japan or in Mexico, it's much more formal. In Japan, there's bowing. There's much more respect for elders. In Spanish-speaking countries, people are addressed as don or doña, and it's just very different. And we have to be mindful of this distinction so that we don't, offend anyone or create any awkward situations. And I'm actually curious to know if you know how to present and receive a business card in Japan?
I do not. If it happened right now, I think I'd mess it up. So how does it go exactly?
Okay, well, here's my business card.
Uh-huh.
And if we were in Japan, I would present it to you with my two fingers on the top corners.
And I take it like this?
Exactly. You would take it like this. We would be bowing to each other in respect for the significance of the business card.
Okay, and can I write some notes on the back of it?
No.
Oh, okay, because that's what I do here.
So you would read it and put it in a very respectful place versus as you were discussing what you might do in the United States.
Put it in here.
Right.
Show it reverence and respect.
Exactly.
So if we're being sensitive and taking the long view, we're going to be aware of differences in opinion and in time and in how we view others. Like you said, the president of the company, we respect authority more in other cultures. If we're not bringing our prejudices in our own culture and being ethnocentric, if we're not doing that, we're going to be aware. We're going to be aware of the fact that something like a business card might have a higher value in other cultures. Yeah?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Cool.
Very good. Very good.
Okay, well, another idea to keep in mind, I think, would be different time orientations.
Can you just start that over? Another time without looking?
Right.
Another thing to keep in mind.
Another thing to keep in mind and be aware of would be different time orientations is what they're referred to as. How we value time. In the United States, time is very valuable and it's very valuable around the world, but how that manifests itself and how we do business can be very different, Heidi. Can you discuss just a couple of the differences for us?
Yes, Daryl, that's a really topical and timely question. So in the United States, as you mentioned, our time is a commodity. We seem to have limited time. So when we schedule an appointment for a certain time, that is the time. We expect people there at that time. In other cultures, however, the time scheduled could be a little bit looser. And there have been issues around scheduled business meetings in different countries where people may not arrive at the same time due to cultural differences that could make the business interaction challenging. So it's important to be mindful of that.
Very precious commodity. However, it's treated differently around the world. Going back to differences in cultural ethics, right and wrong differ very much from place to place. And so that bleeds into how we treat other people's time. I want to wrap up with some broad strokes about our story on global entrepreneurship and discuss the importance of being sensitive, culturally sensitive, and how that connects to being good global citizens in the business place.
So if we could leave you with some parting words or some encouragement as you embark on this exciting pursuit of possibly being global entrepreneurs in the future or just in any dealings with people from different cultures, we'd like to encourage you to be patient, to give people time if they're maybe speaking a different language and they don't understand your cultures and traditions right away. Give them time. Give them the opportunity to save face as you would hope someone else would give you. If an error is made, be patient and give someone a chance. And then finally, don't be ethnocentric, meaning no one culture is better than any other. Cultures are different, and ours is not better than other cultures we encounter. So I hope those are some takeaways for you from today.
Be patient, be sensitive, and you will be very good global citizens in the international marketplace. Thank you very much for your time, Heidi.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you. That wraps up, that concludes our discussion and giving you a cultural framework on global entrepreneurship. Thank you. I'm Daryl Collins.
And Heidi Diamond.